When Chanty finally woke up, disoriented and groggy, she had no idea she had been unconscious for almost 2 days. Her last memories were a chaotic blur, but as her eyes adjusted, she recognized Lorena's familiar face, her joy overwhelming. "You're awake!" Lorena exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. Chanty's joy overflowed when she saw Lorena, as if she had seen a long-lost family member. She cried as she embraced Lorena and thanked her for coming. Lorena explained that Jake had brought her to take care of her because she had fainted and needed someone to look after her. Lorena further described that when she arrived, she was covered in cuts and bruises on her arms and face, and was only wearing a bikini and a bathrobe. Chanty tried to piece together her fragmented memories, the intensity of the battle, Jacob's bloodied form, and Vasper's worried face as he caught her. Lorena had been caring for her since she had fainted. Jake had taken Lorena to his mansion specifically to look after Chanty out of respect, knowing they couldn't attend to her themselves. Lorena had changed her into clean clothes and made sure she was comfortable. Chanty's mind raced with concern for Jacob and Jake. She remembered Vasper catching her before she blacked out. "How are you feeling after teleporting here? How do you feel?" Chanty asked Lorena, her voice full of concern. "Miss Chanty, this is my 3rd time teleporting with Sir Jake, but I'm still not used to it. It feels like my insides are being twisted, but now I feel okay. I still have a little dizziness, but I can handle it," Lorena explained to her. She nodded at Lorena's answer and smiled. "Where are Jacob and Jake?" Chanty asked, her voice still weak. Worry clouded her eyes as she recalled how Vasper had overpowered Jacob. "They're fine," Lorena reassured her. "But you should take it easy. You've been out for nearly 2 days. Chanty's heart raced at the news. 2 days? That's impossible. She swung her legs off the bed, feeling an urgent need to check on everyone. As she stood, the room spun briefly, but Lorena steadied her. "Slow down, Miss Chanty. Let me help you," Lorena said, guiding her towards the door. Chanty noticed she was in a different room, now on the ground floor. Lorena supported her as they climbed the stairs. The mansion had been cleaned up, the wreckage from the battle mostly cleared away. The living room was now completely open, the shattered glass replaced by the open air. Chanty saw David, Marco, Justin, Louis, Gabriel, Jake, and Jacob in the newly restored room. The light from the open space bathed them in a warm glow. David's face lit up when he saw her. "Chanty!" He rushed over, wrapping her in a tight embrace. To her, David felt like an older brother, a comforting presence in the chaos. Tears welled up in her eyes as she clung to him. "I'm so glad you're okay," he whispered. "Yeah," her voice breaking. David gently wiped her tears away, his expression serious yet kind. The others watched her, their faces a mix of relief and concern. Chanty's gaze landed on Jake and Jacob. Their faces were unscathed, as if the battle had left no mark on them. Yet Jacob avoided her eyes, his demeanor distant. Jake's cold, serious expression bore into her, making her feel uneasy. "Are you all right?" Chanty asked, her voice directed at Jacob, who still refused to meet her gaze. "Yes, I'm fine," Jacob replied curtly, turning away slightly. Chanty's heart sank, sensing the wall he had built between them. Was he deliberately avoiding her? Jake, on the other hand, stared at her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. His cold demeanor masked his true feelings, but Chanty couldn't shake the sense of underlying emotion. Marco, Justin, Louis, and Gabriel watched with a mixture of happiness and worry in their eyes. They cared deeply for Chanty, and their concern was evident. "I'll get you something to eat," Lorena said, heading to the kitchen. Chanty looked around, taking in the scene. She noticed the beach below, once beautiful, now devastated. Trees and rocks littered the shore, the aftermath of the battle evident everywhere. Jake's yacht lay overturned on a massive rock, a testament to the fierce fight that had taken place. As she looked out at the ocean, Chanty felt the weight of the damage. The island had been ravaged, like it had been hit by a violent storm. She turned back to her friends, feeling their eyes on her. They were observing her reactions closely, reading her like an open book. But there was one face she searched for in vain, Vasper. Her heart ached with a mix of confusion and longing. She didn't want her friends to notice, didn't want them to see how deeply she cared for their enemy. Jake spoke up, his voice serious and cold. Vasper left, but he said he'd be back. Chanty felt everyone's gaze on her, as if they were trying to decipher her thoughts. Jacob's eyes, when they finally met hers, seemed to judge her, holding something she couldn't quite place. She felt a pang of guilt, like she was betraying her friends by her feelings for Vasper. After all, Vasper's family was responsible for her father's death, the burning of their mansion, and the disappearance of her beloved nanny, Maria. Her heart and mind were at war. She couldn't meet their eyes for long. Just then, Lorena returned, calling her to the table. "Come on, Miss Chanty, you need to eat." Chanty followed her, grateful for the distraction. As she sat down, she tried to push away the tumultuous feelings inside her. She was surrounded by friends, yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Vasper. The inner conflict gnawed at her, a constant reminder of the complicated path she was on. After finishing her meal, Chanty felt a bit more grounded, though her mind remained a storm of emotions. Chanty gazed out of the large, shattered window, her eyes following Louis, Justin, Marco, and Gabriel as they descended the cliffside to the beach below. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore mingled with David's commanding voice, carrying the weight of authority as he instructed the men to clear the debris and restore the beach to its former beauty. The salty sea air mingled with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil, filling her lungs and awakening her senses. Jake's appreciative nod to David did not go unnoticed by her. She admired the resilience of her friends, their unwavering determination to restore order amidst the chaos that had befallen them. Her heart swelled with gratitude for their efforts. She approached Jacob, who stood in the living room, his figure a solitary silhouette against the backdrop of the tumultuous seascape. His eyes, usually warm and inviting, were now cold and distant, fixed on the beach where Justin and the others labored. Despite sensing her presence, Jacob remained silent, his demeanor a stark contrast to the man she once knew. An unspoken tension hung in the air, palpable and suffocating. Her heart ached with unspoken questions. Why had Jacob become so distant? Was it because of the recent battle with Vasper? Below, the scene was both remarkable and haunting. Broken trees and scattered debris littered the beach, with Jake's yacht overturned and wedged against a massive rock. The chaos seemed to have a life of its own, moving with an eerie precision. She watched in awe, unable to hide her astonishment. "Who's doing this?" she wondered aloud, her eyes searching for the orchestrator. She saw Louis, his hands moving gracefully through the air, directing the objects as if conducting an invisible symphony. Is this Louis's doing? Is that his power? Telekinesis? Her voice brimmed with excitement as she turned to Jacob, who merely nodded without looking at her. Feeling the icy distance between them, Chanty's heart ached. She turned her gaze back to the beach, where Jake and David were diligently helping to clean up. Behind her, Lorena had disappeared, leaving her alone with Jacob. "How have you been, Jacob?" she asked hesitantly, her voice trembling. "Since the fight with Vasper." Jacob finally looked at her, his eyes piercing and intense, like daggers of ice. "Is that question for me? Or for Vasper?" His voice was a whisper, yet it cut through her like a blade. Chanty felt as if she had been doused with cold water, the accusation in his words stinging deeply. Her voice quivered as she replied, "Why would you think I'm asking about Vasper?" "I'm concerned about you, Jacob." Jacob's sarcastic smile didn't reach his eyes. "Really? Because it sure seems like your mind is elsewhere." He took a step closer, and Chanty instinctively stepped back until her back hit the wall. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with tension. "Jacob, stop this. You're making me uncomfortable," Chanty said, her voice shaking. But Jacob kept advancing until there was no more space between them, his body towering over hers. She placed her palms against his chest, trying to push him away, but he was too strong. "Do you have any idea how much it hurt, Chanty?" Jacob's voice was low, filled with pain. "Seeing you with Vasper, not doing anything to stop him. Do you know how I felt?" his eyes bore into hers, and she saw the depth of his anguish. Shanty's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't find the words to respond, her mind reeling from the intensity of his emotions. Jacob's hand moved to the back of her head, and before she could react, his lips crashed onto hers, the kiss filled with desperate passion. She tried to resist, but Jacob's grip was firm, his kiss unyielding. "I love you, Chanty," he whispered between kisses. "I don't care if it's wrong. I need you to know how I feel." His words were a mix of anger and love, each kiss more insistent than the last. Tears streamed down Shanty's face as she begged, "Jacob, please stop. This isn't right." But Jacob was lost in his emotions, unable to hear her pleas. Just then, the door to the living room burst open. David, Jake, and Lorena stood frozen, shocked by the scene unfolding before them. Jake was the first to react, moving with lightning speed. He grabbed Jacob and tore him away from Chanty, his fury palpable. Jacob didn't resist as Jake's fists connected with his face repeatedly. Blood trickled from Jacob's split lip and eyebrow, but he stood his ground, his eyes defiant. Jake shouted, his voice breaking. "When did you go crazy, Jacob? Huh? Don't you have any shame, not even a little respect for yourself? You?" David understood what Jake meant, because Jacob was a man full of self-control, especially around women. Many women chased after him, but he never paid them any attention. There was even a time when a woman undressed in front of him, but he still wasn't interested. The woman felt insulted and went home crying. These situations were the opposite of what they saw in Jacob now. "I love her. I don't care if my love for her is forbidden, all I know is that I love her," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as he looked at Chanty. "I'm sorry for what I did, Chanty. I was carried away by my emotions," Jacob added, his eyes and voice full of regret. "Maybe, Jake, I've really gone crazy," Jacob said with a bitter smile, hitting his own chest. Now he's facing Jake. The eyes of the onlookers were wide, and their mouths were open in shock, especially Justin and Marco, who exchanged glances and shook their heads. But Gabriel already knew how Jacob felt and was surprised that Jacob had the courage to confess his feelings in front of everyone at that moment. David was trying to stay calm despite being shocked by Jacob's confession. The room fell silent, the weight of Jacob's confession hanging in the air. Shanta looked at Jacob, her heart torn between anger and sympathy. She had never seen him so vulnerable, so raw. David finally spoke, his voice steady. "We need to calm down. This isn't helping anyone." He turned to Chanty, his eyes softening. "Are you okay?" Chanty nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine." Jake, still seething, glared at Jacob. "This isn't over," he said, his voice a low growl. "But for now, we need to focus on getting everything back to normal. We still have a lot of work to finish. Let's talk about this later because Vasper will come back, and we need to figure out our setup. Jacob, for now, you are not allowed to approach Chanty." "It depends on when she forgives you," David said, glancing back and forth between Jacob and Chanty. Jacob looked at Chanty and apologized again for what he had done. Chanty just looked at him without responding. "Jake, if possible, please take me home." "For now, I'll stay there and come back when my presence is needed," Jacob said seriously. David nodded at Jake, indicating that he agreed with Jacob's request. Louis and Gabriel approached Jacob and patted him on the shoulder. Jacob understood the support his friends were offering. "Okay, Jake, take Jacob home and come back right away," David said, then told the others to get back to their work. The others slowly dispersed, giving Chanty space. As the night wore on, the tension in the mansion remained thick. Everyone was on edge, the recent events leaving them all emotionally drained. Chanty retreated to her room, needing time to process everything. She couldn't shake Jacob's words or the look in his eyes. As she lay in bed, the images of the day replayed in her mind, each one more haunting than the last. She couldn't understand her feelings for Jacob. She was angry yet felt pity for him. But her feelings for Jacob were very different from what she felt for Vasper. Why didn't she feel any anger toward Vasper? What should she do now? She felt embarrassed to face David's companions, except for David. Is that what love really is? Unconcerned with the situation? She belonged to Vasper, and Jacob's feelings for her. Her heart felt heavy, and her head ached from the events. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the promise of more challenges ahead. The battle may have ended, just for now, but the war within their hearts was just beginning. And as they all faced their own demons, the bonds between them would be tested like never before. When she woke up the next morning, the mansion was quiet. She walked into the living room and saw Lorena arranging the sofa and cleaning up, but the men were nowhere to be seen. Her eyes searched for her companions. "Good morning, Miss Chanty," Lorena said with a smile. "Good morning, Lorena." "It's quiet," she replied, gazing out at the beach. The beach was beautiful, especially with the sunrise. The turquoise water looked inviting, and she imagined taking a swim. "Where is David?" she asked Lorena. "Don't be surprised, Miss Chanty," Lorena said seriously. "Because of what happened with Sir Jacob, Sir David has forbidden the men from approaching or talking to you unless it's important." Chanty was stunned. She hadn't expected things to get to this point. She stayed silent, understanding why the men were avoiding her. Lorena continued, "Sir David wants to protect you." "Even Marco and Justin?" Chanty asked with a frown. Lorena nodded, and Chanty felt sad about their new setup. "Is our situation that serious, Lorena?" Chanty whispered, but Lorena heard her. Lorena continued, "I can't blame anyone, Miss Chanty. If the men fall in love with you, Sir David set boundaries to protect everyone. Your beauty and charm are irresistible, and any man could fall for you. That's why Sir David created these rules." Chanty's face showed her sorrow. Lorena approached her, facing her directly. "Miss Chanty, your beauty is unparalleled. Any man would fall for you without defense," Lorena said gently, touching Chanty's face. "Don't be sad. Get used to the new setup, Miss Chanty." Lorena's eyes were full of understanding and compassion, like a mother explaining things to her child. "From now on, we won't eat together. You can eat first or they can, but Sir David can join us any time. He treats you like a sister, Miss Chanty, not like any other person," Lorena added. Chanty just nodded at what she heard. "I'll prepare our meal, Miss Chanty," Lorena said. She nodded, and Lorena went to the kitchen. When Lorena opened the kitchen door, she saw Justin inside, taking care of the food. Their eyes met before Lorena closed the door again. She felt even more alone. She felt her life becoming lonelier. She thought she had made new friends, but now they couldn't come near her. Was her beauty a curse, causing pain to others like Jacob? What should she do? Was her fate so cruel? She saw Gabriel and Louis watering Jake's plants in the garden. She knew they saw her, but they acted like they didn't. They were openly avoiding her. Sometimes their eyes would meet, but they quickly looked away. She felt like she had a contagious disease that everyone was avoiding. She went back to her room and couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged her father's jar tightly. "Papa, I miss you so much," she said amidst her sobs. "Why is my life like this?" She didn't understand her feelings. She remembered Jacob. "Sorry, Jacob," she whispered to herself while crying. She heard Lorena calling her for breakfast. She told Lorena she would follow. While eating, the food suddenly became bland. Lorena noticed her loss of appetite. After eating, Lorena invited her to swim in the sea. She knew Lorena was trying to cheer her up, and it worked, even for a short while. Lorena told her many stories about David and his family, how she had worked for them, and how kind David was to her. Chanty enjoyed listening to Lorena's tales. They were laughing and talking when Chanty glanced at the mansion and saw Jake looking at them. Their eyes met, but Jake quickly looked away and left. Chanty lost her focus for a moment, then turned her gaze back to the sea. The surroundings were beautiful, a stark contrast to her troubled life. One evening, David sat down with Chanty, his expression serious. Chanty, we need to talk about something important, he began, his voice steady yet filled with an underlying urgency. Chanty looked up from the book she was reading, her eyes meeting David's. What is it? She asked, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Do you know about the Sword of Destiny? I know that Jacob mentioned it to you. They told me that they had informed you about it. I regret to tell you that you are the only one who can use it. We can't hold it, Chanty, David said seriously and with conviction in his voice. He could also see the sadness on Chanty's face. If we could hold it, you wouldn't have to suffer like this. This is one of the things your father didn't want to believe in, which is why he didn't tell you about your true identity. He wanted you to grow up normally like others, David added, his voice revealing how difficult it was for him to say those words. But Chanty remained silent, listening intently and trying to understand the information David was conveying, even though it was hard for her to accept. David took a deep breath. You need to learn how to wield a sword. Chanty's eyes widened in surprise. Speechless. The Sword of Destiny, David explained. It will call to you when you turn 18. That's only a month away. You need to be prepared, not just for that moment but to defend yourself against the Mondragons and their minions if they attack when we're not around. Chanty felt a chill run down her spine. The weight of David's words settled heavily on her. But who will teach me? She asked, her voice hesitant. Jacob was supposed to, but that's impossible now. David answered. And I'm sorry for that, he added. Almost a whisper. I know. It's complicated. But this is necessary for your safety and for the mission. We'll find a way. As they continued their conversation, David also brought up the matter of Chanty's father's ashes. We need to place your father's ashes somewhere you feel is right, he said gently. Where do you want them to be? Chanty thought for a moment. At your villa, she said finally. That place holds a lot of emotional significance for me. My father chose it for your parents, and it feels like the right place. David hesitated. I've been considering selling the property. Laika has found a way to constantly harass us there, despite the invisible shield. It's becoming a liability. Chanty's eyes filled with determination. Please don't sell it, David. It's important to me. We can find a way to make it safe again. David sighed, nodding slowly. All right, we'll keep it. But we need to be extra cautious. Chanty then asked a question that had been bothering her. Why are Justin and Marco avoiding me too? They're your brothers. David's expression softened. It's to ensure no one falls for you, Chanty. We have to be professional and focused on our duty to protect you. Chanty looked down, feeling a mix of emotions. I understand, she said quietly. David explained further. The Sword of Destiny is the only thing that can end the Mondragons. But it can only be wielded by a virgin of fallen angel bloodline. That's you. You need to be the one to face them before Vasper's father gets to you. They need your blood to achieve immortality. Chanty shook her head in disbelief. It's hard to process all of this. I know, David said softly. But you need to be prepared. Your father was in denial about your destiny. He didn't want to believe it, which is why you were never told. It wasn't until Laika attacked him at the vineyard that he reached out to us. Chanty felt a deep sadness as David recounted the events leading to her father's death. And now you need to learn to protect yourself. We will be with you every step of the way. David added. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with David and the others by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope amidst the uncertainty. Chanty still couldn't believe she came from a fallen angel bloodline. It felt like something out of a fairy tale. Her life seemed impossible to believe. David suggested that Lewis should be the one to teach her how to wield the sword since Lewis was the next best after Jacob. The thought of training with Lewis brought some comfort, knowing she wouldn't be alone in this daunting task. David continued, Chanty, it's crucial that you learn this. The Sword of Destiny will call to you on your 18th birthday. We have just 1 month to prepare. Lewis will help you. He's skilled and understands the gravity of the situation. Chanty nodded, still processing the overwhelming information. Thank you, David. I'll do my best. David gave her a reassuring smile. We'll start tomorrow. Get some rest tonight. You'll need it. As Chanty walked back to her room, she felt a mix of fear and determination. Her life was changing in ways she could never have imagined, but she knew she had to embrace it. She looked out the window, the moon casting a gentle glow over the sea. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it with the support of David and his brothers. In the days that followed, Jake called Chanty and Lewis, his voice breaking the silence that had grown between them. Over the past few days, Chanty's heart raced as she heard him. It was the first time she'd heard Jake's voice. In what felt like an eternity. He had been avoiding her, and now she felt a swirl of emotions, relief, anxiety, and a flicker of hope. Jake's distant and cold demeanor had unsettled Chanty, but his intense gaze still had a profound effect on her, as if he could see into her very soul. After the incidents with Jacob, everyone treated her like she had a contagious disease, avoiding her at all costs. But now, facing Jake with Lewis by her side, she knew this moment was crucial. Today, they would train with swords. Follow me, Jake said, his voice steady and calm, yet carrying an undertone of urgency. He moved down the stairs, and Chanty and Lewis followed his deliberate pace. Jake led them into a room with a door that seamlessly blended into the wall. As they entered, Chanty's breath caught in her throat. The secret room was a marvel. The walls were painted pristine white, and bright lights illuminated a stunning array of weapons, from gleaming knives to high-caliber rifles. Chanty couldn't help but be awed by Jake's collection, while Lewis seemed familiar with the sight. Jake walked to the right and opened a cabinet door, revealing an impressive assortment of swords, each with different lengths and intricate designs. Chanty's eyes widened as she took in the array of blades. Jake's gaze remained fixed on her, his eyes holding a depth that made her heart skip a beat. Choose which one you want to use, he said, his voice soft but commanding. Lewis stepped forward first, selecting a simple yet double-edged blade. He examined the sword's details, running his fingers along its edges, while Jake patiently waited for Chanty to make her choice. Chanty hesitated, feeling Jake's eyes on her, the intensity of his gaze making her pulse quicken. She reached for a sword with a simple design that felt right in her hand. As she held it, a fleeting thought crossed her mind: what might the sword of destiny look like? But she pushed the thought aside. All right, is that your final choice? Jake asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Chanty and Lewis both nodded. Jake closed the cabinet with a decisive motion and led the way out of the room, ascending the stairs without looking back. Chanty followed, feeling a mix of anticipation and unease. Jake's sudden coldness left her feeling exposed and uncertain. Was this really how he intended to treat them? Lewis noticed the tension in Chanty's expression and offered her a reassuring smile. Okay, Chanty, where would you like to train? In the mountains or by the beach? Lewis asked, his voice filled with genuine excitement. At the beach, Chanty replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Okay, let's go, Lewis shouted enthusiastically. As they made their way towards their destination, Chanty couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. She glanced at Jake, hoping to catch a glimpse of the warmth she once knew, but his expression remained unreadable. The tension between them crackled like electricity, filling the air with a sense of impending change. Chanty began her training with Lewis. Each morning, the sun would rise slowly over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the beach, signaling the start of their rigorous routine. The mornings were spent learning the basics of swordsmanship, the air filled with the rhythmic clashing of steel as Lewis demonstrated various techniques. Lewis was a patient yet firm instructor, his telekinesis power adding a unique dimension to the training. He could manipulate the sword in Chanty's hands, guiding her movements with an invisible force, ensuring her stance and strikes were precise. Despite his gentle approach, the training was grueling. Chanty often found herself struggling to keep up, her muscles aching from the constant strain. Under the hot afternoon sun, the training became even more intense. The heat was relentless, causing sweat to pour down her face and soak through her clothes. Lewis pushed her to improve with each session, his telekinetic abilities making the exercises both more challenging and more enlightening. He would lift small objects around them, using them as targets for Chanty to strike. Sometimes, he would create invisible barriers, forcing her to adjust her movements and think strategically. Chanty's hands often shook with the effort, her fingers blistered and raw from gripping the hilt of the sword. She stumbled, made mistakes, and occasionally felt the sting of the blade as it nicked her skin. Each cut was a reminder of her vulnerability, but also of her growing strength. Lorena was always nearby, ready to tend to her wounds, with a gentle touch and a soothing balm. Her presence was a constant source of comfort, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this arduous journey. The slow pace of the training was daunting. Every movement, every lesson, seemed to stretch on endlessly, demanding her full concentration and effort. Chanty often felt like she was moving through molasses, each step forward requiring immense willpower. But with each passing day, she felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her abilities. The weight of the sword became less burdensome, her strikes more fluid and precise. One evening, after an especially intense training session, Chanty and Lewis sat on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. The sky was a canvas of deep oranges and purples, the sun setting in a blaze of colors. Chanty's muscles ached with exhaustion, but there was a sense of accomplishment in her heart. "You're doing well," Lewis said, his voice soft yet encouraging. "You're a natural." Chanty smiled, though her body screamed for rest. "Thank you, Lewis. I never thought I'd be doing this." Lewis nodded, his eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "None of us expected our lives to turn out this way. But we adapt, we grow, and we fight for what's important." Chanty looked out at the horizon, feeling the gentle breeze on her face. "I just hope I'm ready when the time comes." "You will be," Lewis assured her. "We'll make sure of it." As the days turned into weeks, Chanty's skills improved. She felt more connected to her destiny, more determined to face the challenges ahead. The bond between her and Lewis grew stronger, a mutual respect and understanding forming between them. The training sessions, though exhausting, became a testament to her resilience and her unwavering spirit. The threat of the Mondragons loomed ever closer, a dark cloud on the horizon of their lives. David and his brothers remained vigilant, knowing that at any moment, they could be forced into a battle for their lives. Chanty's training was not just about mastering the sword, it was about preparing for the fight of her life. One night, after a particularly grueling training session, Chanty and David sat by the fireplace, the warmth providing a welcome comfort. The fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, the crackling wood a soothing soundtrack to their conversation. "David," Chanty began, her voice hesitant, "do you really think I'm the one who can defeat the Mondragons?" David looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and determination. "Yes, Chanty. I believe you are. The prophecy speaks of a warrior with the blood of angels, a pure heart, and an unyielding spirit. You are that warrior." Chanty took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her destiny settle upon her shoulders. "I will do everything I can to fulfill that prophecy." David nodded, his expression resolute. "We will stand by you, every step of the way." As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Chanty felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just a girl lost in a world of chaos, she was a warrior, destined to fight for her life, and the lives of those she loved. The journey was far from over, but with David and his brothers by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following morning, Chanty woke up to the first light of dawn, her body sore from the previous day's exertion. She walked to the beach where Lewis was already waiting, the cool morning air filled with the scent of salt and the sound of waves gently lapping at the shore. "Ready for another day?" Lewis asked, a faint smile playing on his lips. Chanty nodded, gripping the hilt of her sword. Ready. The training continued, each session blending into the next, in a relentless cycle of physical and mental challenges. Lewis's telekinetic powers became an integral part of the training. He used them to lift and manipulate objects, creating dynamic obstacles for Chanty to navigate. She had to anticipate his movements, react quickly, and strike with precision. Sometimes, he would use his powers to disarm her, forcing her to recover and adapt. It was a slow, painstaking process, each lesson stretching her to her limits. There were moments when Chanty felt overwhelmed, the weight of her destiny pressing down on her. But she pushed through, drawing strength from the support of those around her. Lorena continued to tend to her wounds, her gentle hands a balm for both body and spirit. "You're doing great, Miss Chanty," she would say, her voice filled with warmth. "Each cut, each bruise is a sign of your progress." Chanty would nod, grateful for Lorena's care. The training was brutal, but it was also transforming her. She was becoming stronger, more resilient, and more capable of facing the darkness that loomed on the horizon. One particularly difficult day, Lewis intensified the training, using his telekinesis to create a barrage of objects for her to deflect. The sun beat down on them, the heat oppressive. Her arms felt like lead, her movements sluggish and imprecise. "Focus, Chanty," Lewis urged, his voice cutting through the haze of fatigue. "You can do this." She gritted her teeth, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. She moved with determination, her sword slicing through the air. She deflected the objects with a series of swift, precise strikes. But just as she was gaining momentum, a sharp pain shot through her arm as the sword slipped, cutting into her skin. Lorena was there in an instant, her hands gentle but firm as she tended to the wound. "Breathe, Miss Chanty," she said softly. "You're doing well. Don't let this setback stop you." She nodded, fighting back tears of frustration. She knew she couldn't afford to give up. The stakes were too high. She looked at Lewis, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Take a moment," he said, his voice steady. "Then we'll try again." As she sat on the beach, the cool breeze offering some relief from the heat, she closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. She visualized the sword in her hand, the feel of its weight, the way it moved through the air. She imagined herself mastering each strike, each defense, becoming the warrior she needed to be. Jake watched from a distance, his eyes fixed on Chanty as she trained with unwavering determination. Every movement she made, every bead of sweat that glistened on her skin, spoke of her relentless drive to master her skills. His heart ached, with a mix of admiration and longing. She was pushing herself to the limit, her dedication shining like a beacon in the harsh light of their reality. Lewis, with his telekinesis powers, demonstrated his own prowess, but Jake's eyes never left Chanty. They were all skilled in various forms of combat, adept with weapons far beyond the capabilities of ordinary humans. Their enemies often wielded powers which made their training with regular weapons seem almost trivial. Yet, the weight of their mission demanded nothing less than perfection. The Mondragons were a threat that couldn't be faced by ordinary means. They had people assigned to handle mundane activities, but when it came to facing the Mondragons, only the extraordinary would suffice. Jake's gaze lingered on Chanty, her movements fluid yet powerful, each strike and parry reflecting her fierce spirit. His mind wandered, wrestling with the complexity of his feelings. The most challenging part of this mission wasn't the physical danger, it was the emotional turmoil that tore at his soul. How could he suppress his love for her? The pain was like a sword slicing through his heart every time he saw her struggle. If only he could wield the sword of destiny, he would take on her mission himself. But that was beyond his reach, so he did what he could, support her, while hiding his feelings. A bitter smile tugged at his lips as he thought about the cruel twist of fate. His love for Chanty was a secret he guarded fiercely, yet it threatened to destroy him from within. The sight of Vasper and Chanty together, their whispered confessions of love, was like a dagger to his heart. And now, Jacob, whom Jake considered a brother, was also in love with Chanty. The jealousy and anger roiled within him, a storm he barely kept in check. Seeing Jacob kiss Chanty had nearly driven him to madness, yet he hid his true feelings, locking them away deep inside. Jake's eyes traced the lines of Shanta's form, her t-shirt clinging to her body, soaked with sweat. How could he not be drawn to her beauty? She's seductively beautiful. It felt like the heavens were testing his resolve, challenging the very core of his being. Frustration boiled over, and with a primal roar, he punched a large rock with all his might. "Jake, stop this madness," he whispered through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible. The force of his punch sent the rock flying, startling birds from a nearby tree, their frantic flight a stark contrast to the turmoil within him. The noise caught the attention of his friends, especially Gabriel. Gabriel approached slowly, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Jake, what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm yet probing. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "It's nothing, Gabriel. Just needed to blow off some steam," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Gabriel wasn't convinced but decided not to push further. As they stood in silence, Jake's thoughts drifted back to Chanty. The sight of her pushing herself, fighting for their cause, stirred something deep within him. He knew he had to be strong, not just for himself, but for her and for everyone counting on them. The internal battle raged on, each day a test of his willpower and resolve. His love for her was a storm he couldn't quell, an agony he couldn't escape. And as he watched her, a silent promise formed in his heart. No matter what it took, he would protect her, even if it meant tearing his own soul apart.